Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight here at GSVlabs in Boston. My name is Dan Reus. I'm with the Pet Care Innovation Prize, and welcome to our event. Thanks for joining us. It's been great to network with you. We've seen some companies that are doing stuff in the supplement space, some people that are doing things in tech, and some folks that are doing things in food. So we're seeing some great things here in Boston. The format of this event is going to be really quickly. I'm going to tell you just a brief amount about the Pet Care Innovation Prize, which we are sponsored by Purina, and we give cash and business support to early stage pet care companies to help them launch and find, or to help them once they've launched, help them grow and kind of get established. You can find out more at petcareinnovationprize.com. It's no strings attached cash, lots of great opportunities, and the current application window is open. So if you have any questions, you can see me after the event. If you're watching this on video, you can just go to petcareinnovationprize.com. But when we do these events, we find that there are pet care startups kind of all over the country and really all over the world in these interesting little clusters. And we find these ecosystems. And so what we like to do is we kind of like to ground these events in what the startups are doing. So we're going to just introduce you to two local startups, and then I'll introduce you to the other folks here on stage with me, and we'll have a discussion about what it's like to grow a pet care startup and what that looks like and what the opportunities are and what the challenges are. But first of all, I'm going to introduce a great man, Arthur. He's with Adopets, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that. He helped us organize this event, and so we've known him for a couple of years. I just want to give him thanks for helping to organize this. And why don't you come on up and tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing?
Thank you, Dan. Good evening. How are you guys doing? My name is Arthur. I'm the founder of Adopets. We are a global pet adoption platform. We optimize the pet adoption process for shelters and rescues around the planet. Right now, being used in India, Australia, and here in the US. Our focus is really making sure that you can find the animal you're looking for and bring them home in the fastest, most enjoyable possible way. And at the same time, helping shelters to optimize how they do it so they can save more lives and have more people find their forever pets. That's what we do. Thank you, Dan, Adam, and Andy for having us here. I think it's a great community. I'm biased, but we just left Techstars, which was literally across this curtain here. And we love GSVlabs and all we do. Thank you, guys.
Great. And an amazing coincidence, the other startup that we're going to hear from tonight is also somebody with some Brazilian DNA. And Diego,
Brazilians are taking over.
Yeah, the Brazilians are taking over, yeah. All right, tell us all about what you're doing.
Sure. So I'm founder and CEO of GoPetie. Is a pet license and management system. So we help municipalities across the U.S. to build a safer, smarter, and healthier pet community by increasing pet license compliance. So on average, in any given city or town in the U.S., 45% of dog owners don't license their dogs just because they don't know of, or when they know about it, they don't license because the system's too complicated. A lot of towns and cities in the U.S. are using paper forms. You have to download the PDF form, mail a check. So we are actually automating the whole process and creating a pet community around the pet license. And so cities are increasing the engagement between pet owners and cities, as well as we allow pet owners to connect and help each other through the licensing services already there. So that's pretty much what we're doing.
All right, thanks, Diego. So next I want to introduce our two panelists. And first of all, I want to just give a shout out of thanks to Andy. Andy is sitting here because he found out about 17 minutes ago that he was going to be a panelist. Lauren Abda, who's with Branch Food here in town, she's the CEO and founder of it. She is stuck on a train somewhere in Rhode Island and could not make it. And we're having a conversation about investment in the pet care space and what it's like to be a founder and kind of that strategic journey. And Andy happens to have a unique point of view, and he was already going to be at the event, and he's graciously stepped in. So want to give him a shout out for that. But let's start with Adam. If you give a little bit about your background. And Adam Hobler is with Purina's 9 Square Ventures, and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so 9 Square Ventures is this on? Okay. We are the venture arm of Nestle Purina, and so what we do is we go to events like this, and we help host the Pet Care Innovation Prize along with Active Capital to identify like emerging startups in the pet care space. And so my specific role within the group is to go out and help scout new companies to potentially bring into our investment portfolio.
Great. And so just as a frame of reference, the pet care industry in the U.S. is about $80 billion a year. It's growing. There's some interesting fundamentals behind it. You know, over the last 10 or 15 years, there's something people call the humanization of pets, where people really started spending more on their pets and treating them more like another extended member of the household, and you see that. So pet is kind of interesting. Andy, if you could tell us just a little bit about your kind of entrepreneurial journey. So you're kind of interesting in that you do a little bit of investing now. You know some of the companies that we do work with, which I think will be beneficial. But why don't you tell people a little bit about how you got to where you are in the pet care industry?
Sure, happy to. Good evening, everyone. So I have been in the pet industry for over 30 years. I joined what had been my family's business right out of school. It was a small catalog business focused on pet care professionals like groomers and so forth. And we had a small retail store. We grew that retail store into a chain of pet superstores and sold that to Petco some years later. And then converted what had been this catalog business into kind of a multi-channel CPG across a number of non-food pet product categories. And I exited that business last year in 2018. And I'm now working with private equity groups looking to acquire middle market companies in the pet space to grow. And also working with a venture group to help identify and source and evaluate and consult for businesses, startup companies, and early stage businesses in the pet space. So I'm kind of wearing a couple of different hats. I'm here because I'm interested in the pet space and interested to learn about what's new. I'm here because I do a little bit of angel investing myself. And I'm here to help out the venture firm that I work with to help identify potential investments in the pet space. And so kind of all different parts of that: services, food, non-food, technology, et cetera.
So if Lauren were here, if she could join us, her firm is Branch Food, so obviously she would have a strong opinion about the food side of it. In fact, she's invested, her company's looked at several pet care companies on the food side. But can you talk about from what you see, because you kind of had that retail experience and everything, what is food versus services, and is that changing? Do you see anything in the industry that's interesting to you, or is it still, like the old industry that, there's a bunch of kibble on the shelves that has been the same kibble for the last 5 years? How are things changing?
It's very funny. It's easier to say, is there anything that isn't changing? So it's remarkable how everything from certainly food has changed dramatically and is continuing to with the innovation of a lot of these DTC brands of food, but even the composition of the food and the way it's marketed and manufactured and so forth. But you mentioned earlier the humanization trend. That's really the underlying element that I think drives all of the growth of the industry, and a lot of the innovation, bringing technology to bear on that sort of makes it interesting. And there's a lot of disruption happening. I'm seeing, there's certainly disruption in the services space. A lot of the veterinary chains being purchased by larger chains and bringing technology and better service and care to the services space, but also the combination of services under a single roof, services mixing with retail, and of course the impact of e-commerce, what that's doing to traditional brick and mortar retailers, to traditional distribution channels. It's really quite upending and creating a lot of disruption, which creates a huge amount of opportunity. So there's opportunity everywhere, I think, in the pet space.
So Adam, talk a little bit about what you guys see, or from your perspective as you look at startups, what's interesting out there and the changes.
The changes, just the overall pet landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, like 20 years ago, there was pretty much Mars, Purina, and Hills. Like those were like the three big players. And now you go to the shelf, especially at any kind of pet specialty, but even like Walmart and Target, and like the shelf is so fragmented. So people are so open to smaller brands, to like unique propositions. And so that's like the disruption in like traditional like food treats space. But then like as you were talking about like with e-commerce, and just that the technology, I guess technology continues to play a bigger role in like all of our day-to-day lives. With the humanization, people are looking for that technology to also make similar positive impacts on how they interact with their pets. So like the looking for their adoptable pet on Adopets is one. Like the wearables, like there's wearable companies popping up left and right, smart bowls, smart collars. Like everybody's looking for these unique ways to make their pet ownership more convenient. And e-commerce technology is playing a huge factor there. So it's like there's not only disruption in the traditional space of the food, treats, and litter, but there's a huge disruption on the technology side too, and how services and technology are playing a significantly larger role.
So let's talk a little bit about, one of the things that we hear from startups is that, there's a lot of opportunity in pet, but then there's also a lot of opportunities to focus, because you can try and like, am I doing this for mass? Am I doing this for specialty? What am I trying to do and what am I trying to accomplish? What do you think is something interesting about how, and maybe in your role as a pet parent now instead of, not necessarily in your day job, but what's interesting about how people purchase for their pets and what's kind of happening with how people are buying services, buying products. Have you seen, what are the changes that you've seen? Lots of people will talk about Chewy and, all of these big e-commerce kinds of things. What are the other kinds of things that are interesting that you may not have seen, that would have been surprising 5 or 10 years ago or back when you got started with a retailer?
So I know. So I'm a pet parent of an adorable 100-pound, half golden, half lab. He's like 8.5 years old, but he acts like he's a puppy. Like he's got this full body wiggle that he does whenever whenever someone pays attention to him, he'll sit there and he won't move a muscle. But as soon as someone looks at him and says like hi to him or shows any kind of acknowledgement, he like bursts into puppy mode and gets so excited. So when I think about like how our lives have changed, like in the last roughly 9 years that we've owned them. We tried an early stage wearable just out of curiosity. We wanted to see like how much is he moving, like is his activity spiking during different parts of the day, what's it like on days that I don't take him to work, because I get the privilege of getting to take him to work just about every day, and whenever I wear black pants they'll attest to that. And so, we tried an early stage wearable that just gave us a little bit more insight into like his activity levels. Actually, just earlier today, my wife said like, "Hey, Chief's almost out of food," and she's just gonna Amazon Prime it because you can get the best price there. And since I won't be in town to pick it up for him, she's just gonna go ahead and order it real quick. So it's like otherwise, it would have been a trip to the stores. We'd have to wrangle up the 3 kids, throw them in the car, head to the store, pick it up. So it's just that made pet ownership more convenient and allowed us to be, I guess, a little bit more knowledgeable in terms of what his day-to-day life is like with a wearable.
And how do you and we'll ask you the same question, Andy, but think about also a little bit about like veterinary and services and like how those things start intersecting with it, because you're no longer. I mean, when your purchases for Chief are, they're all over the map now, right? They're not just things that you would have bought at a traditional pet store 5 years ago. So.
Well, yeah, it's like, his vet visits, we know we can get HeartGuard cheaper when we order it online. So it's like we traditionally always bought that through the vet channel, and the vet channel hasn't figured out necessarily a solution to that quite yet. And so we'll, we just order that through Chewy whenever we get our HeartGuard. So that's, to your point, that's another change in terms of like our vet services sides of things.
All right. And Andy, why don't you talk a little bit about your own experience, and then do you see things? We talked a little bit about the kinds of companies that you look at or have looked at from a venture perspective or whatever, but some of these are much more services driven kinds of companies, and they're not things that are sold by something that can ever go into a shopping cart. They don't produce revenue that way. So talk a little bit about what you see as a pet parent and what's changing since you've been around.
Yeah. So there are, and again, so many changes, but thinking about in the services area in particular, the growth of things like doggy daycare, which really, it existed 5 years ago, but the rate of acceleration of that is really remarkable. We've got a couple of good-sized chains that are operating in that space, Dogtopia and Cambawa, that are doing a great job, and a lot of others that are sort of creating interesting models around that, mixing the services of boarding and veterinary and daycare and training and so forth, and of course the remote app-based, dog walkers and so forth. But even within the product space, and certainly Amazon and Chewy have absolutely had a huge and continue to have a huge impact on how pet owners buy everything for their pets. There are interesting things happening as well in the maybe parts that, and I don't know if this is directly responsive to your question, but maybe parts that the consumer or the pet owner can't necessarily see. So Vets First Choice, which is part of Covetrus, when Vets First Choice and Henry Schein merged, provides sort of that back office functionality and fulfillment for all of the veterinary medicines, prescription meds, and other things that the consumer needs from their vet. They have, I think, provided that independent service provider, the veterinarian, with a way to at least be somewhat more competitive with the online pharmacies. So I think that's is having a significant effect and will have a greater effect in the future. The merging of services and product is certainly part of that evolution as well. So I think those are a few things.
So so I mentioned that, in the room we've had a few people doing apps or SaaS-based things that are B2B. So like the two startups that we saw that came up here, a lot of that it was really B2B driven. But we also have supplement companies. We have some food companies here. So how do you think about all of those things being in the same industry? Like it's not like you're, looking at a portfolio where they're very homogeneous. They're all over the map as far as their delivery model, as far as who the consumer, who's the actual purchaser. Pet has the challenge that the user is typically not the purchaser. So talk a little bit about how you kind of make sense of all of that kind of what could be very fragmented. And you've got the mic if you'd start with us.
Sure.
We're not holding you to this, by the way.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I kind of think of pet as like a microcosm of a whole bunch of other industries. So, what are the elements that bring everything together? You think of the food, you think of services, probiotic supplements, et cetera, and they kind of exist as sort of their own sort of categories, but they're almost like sub-industries. And the coalescing element is how we all think of our pets, right? And how the humanization of how we want to improve the care and so forth. And there's an element of convenience where you can get all of this together. So I don't know if that's responsive precisely to what you're saying, but that's how I'm sort of thinking.
Right. So they kind of come together in is it about the pet? Is the pet or the pet household, or what kind of drives what allows these disparate fields to kind of stay together?
I mean, it's just more shifting, like you said, like kind of a microcosm of several categories. It's just an overall like pet care ecosystem that allows you to be as involved or uninvolved as you want to be, right? So there's like so many different that you can, for services, for example, you can take your dog for a walk, or you can have someone walk them for you. For knowing your dog's day-to-day stats.
Yeah, it can be a gig kind of thing, or it can be a regular person.
Yeah. And so like for knowing your dog's stats, you can have a wearable and smart bowls that'll tell you how much he ate, how much activity she did that day, or you can just eyeball it, right? Like you did 20 years ago. From a food standpoint, or just like understanding your diet, like there's DNA tests now that you can do, and different diagnostics like biome tests to understand everything about how the inside of them is working too. Or you can, again, eyeball it like you did 20 years ago. So there's just all these different like disparate components that can come together to help you or enable you to be a more or less involved pet owner. And they can all work together to ultimately enable that.
So shifting gears a little bit, so this is an interesting industry. There's an opportunity, what I hear is when these things that are separate silos in other places have some adjacency in pet, there's an opportunity to do some interesting disruption and crossing boundaries and things. But there's an idea that, it's like the regulatory path has got to be easier in pet because, it can't be as difficult as in humans. Is that the case? Can you talk a little bit about, like, is there, if somebody's out there as an entrepreneur, like, well, I want to do this in pet because I don't have to worry about a regulatory environment like I have to worry about in humans. Is that the case or not?
That is not the case. So there is the AFCO that regulates the animal space, and there's the NASC that regulates the supplement space, and they're essentially proxies for like the USDA is the equivalent of AFCO, and I don't recall the acronym for the comp in the US for the NASC, but essentially, yeah, if it's a completely new ingredient that doesn't have any previous knowledge around it, it's probably going to take you 4 to 5 years to get the substantiation to get it approved through those entities, those government entities.
Okay.
So
So like you see, like right now, CBD oil is huge, and actually CBD oil is now kind of crested because, it was okay because it wasn't really shown to be unsafe, but now people have been making claims, and so now it's coming back to, well, it may be safe, but it doesn't do what you say it does, kind of thing, right?
yeah, well, yeah, it's like anything. The bigger it becomes, the more it shows up on radars of regulatory bodies, and so as CBD continues to become bigger and bigger, I know within the human space it's getting a new level of rigor, and same within the pet space. Fortunately, right now the claims that they're making fall under the NASC, which allows them to be a little more liberal with some of the claims that they make. And because it is a supplement and it's not a primary part of the diet.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Andy, when you talk a little bit, because you've got this experience with at the retail level, so talk a little bit about what, if somebody's watching this, they've probably got a pet and everything, but what does the typical shopping cart look like for the pet parent, and how do people buy for their pets? Are they buying stuff that they never used to buy before? Do you see that? Do you track that still or not? Or, if it was like, well, we got 20 cans of the same dog food and that lasted us a month, and then the next month we got 20 cans again, or, how many more things are there, and what's the spend look like, and what drives that kind of increase in the basket?
It's a good question, and what I would tell you, one of the most exciting parts to me of the pet industry is to the extent that you can be innovative and come up with a solution to a problem that perhaps people didn't realize they had. Because people love their pets so much, they are open to that. And because, relatively speaking, the pet industry, it's growing very quickly, and it's still relatively nascent when you think of it relative to the human counterparts. And so an example comes to mind that is somewhat outdated, but I'll use it for effect. And so if you were to walk into a pet retailer and you had never seen SUV liners for the back of your SUV, you might just think that part of owning a pet means you're going to have, when you go for a hike with your dog, you're going to have a muddy back of your SUV, until you see, wow, there's a product that actually can keep the back of my SUV clean. And all of a sudden you realize, wow, that's a solution to a problem. I didn't realize I was enduring pain around that problem. And there's so much opportunity to identify problems that people don't perceive in the industry. I think that's one of the bigger drivers, and in my estimation, especially in the non-food CPG component, which is where I kind of focus a lot of my attention. But I think the same is true, the example we talked about before, daycare. Who would have thought that there's an opportunity that you could bring your dog somewhere for the day while you're at work. He can be entertained and exercised and exhausted by the time you pick him up at the end of the day. That's pretty cool. Didn't realize that existed, and now I'm a consumer of that service. So without the specifics of how many dollars are spent in each product category, I think my big takeaway, what I think about, is that I won't say it's infinitely expandable, but it's limited somewhat by your imagination.
Well, that's interesting, Adam, that reminds me of, he's talking about doggy daycare, so you have this problem that, nobody really thought about, what do I do with my dog in between? It's like, well, I leave it at home, and if it can't be left at home, then I leave it in the backyard. Now we have, so we have the idea of, different models for that and different walking things, but then you also have things like, a couple of the companies we've met in the past that are doing cognitive play, what to do when your dog is bored at home. And, so computer games and things for your interactive toys for your pets, which are categories that nobody would have dreamed of
Well, now there's even like you don't even have to leave your dog at home, and you can still have a social life because there's more places popping up that have like bars and restaurants that are also dog parks. So like your dog goes off and does his thing while you hang out with your social network and grab a beer or a wine or a soda and just kind of hang out while your dog does their thing. And so you can still go out, be social, the social butterfly that you once were, and your dog can come along with you.
That's a great point. And one of the reasons that drives that is, we've seen from some of the companies that do these services is that pet households tend to be spending more. They're good consumers in other areas. So landlords like people that have pets if you live in multi-unit luxury because they typically get a larger unit and they're willing to spend more on services and amenities and things. And so a pet is actually an indicator of a well-spending household. What's something interesting that you've seen from some of the companies this year that you've looked at? What's an example of something that you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. It doesn't have to be somebody that's a Pet Care Innovation Prize company or not, or somebody from here, but just talk a little bit about a couple of interesting companies that that why you think they're interesting. I'm going to ask each of you to do that.
One that was interesting to me that we came across not too long ago was a company that is it's I think maybe it's more interesting to me because it like solves a problem that we have. We like to take our dog out with us, but he's like I said, he's 100 pounds and he's got some fur on him. So in the summer in St. Louis, he can get a little hot, and we always want to make sure he has enough water. And trying to pour a water bottle like into his mouth, like I'm pretty sure he's only actually drinking like a quarter of it. And so we've tried these like plastic. Like nylon type reusable water bowls that they're like impossible to clean. They always get mold and get like funky stuff even if we like put it in the dishwasher. And so there's this company that has this, it's almost like a snap bracelet type technology that you can put on a reusable water bottle that unfolds into a little bowl for your dog, and it can hold like 16 ounces of water. So now we can have our normal water bowl or water bottle that we have with us, like on a bike ride or on a run, unsnap it. You guys are all familiar with snap bracelets, right? Like the really cool from like the early 90s, I think they were. So maybe not relevant for everyone.
Real cool.
Maybe
yeah.
dating myself here, but they're so cool. And so like unsnapping that off your water bottle, unfold it, put it down, pour the water in it, and your dog can actually get a drink, and you can feel confident that they're drinking their fill versus, just trying to catch what's falling in their mouth. So,
Awesome.
So that's one that jumped out to me.
Yeah. Andy, what's something that you've seen recently that just is kind of interesting?
Ones that I can talk about. I would say maybe a company that it's not perhaps that well known, but again, the Vet's First Choice model I just think is fascinating. How they provide these services to the veterinarian to allow the veterinarian to sort of leapfrog where they were before. That's not something that I think the consumer or pet owner can relate to. I'm going to have to think a little bit more about a specific product that I can talk about there.
Well, that's a great segue to, we've seen in a couple of the companies that we've seen in the Pet Care Innovation Prize, companies that are helping dog walking, dog services business, pet services businesses or vets succeed. Veterinary is one that we all need veterinarians to succeed. It's a very high stress profession. A lot of people get into it for altruistic reasons, and then it's hard to make money in there. So, companies that can help vets succeed, help them be more successful are important. Or we've seen a couple of our companies that help walking services and people like that become more, or, walkers become more successful. I'm thinking of like Barclay that makes it so that you can actually, earn enough of an income that you could actually do it full time rather than just a side gig kind of thing that's, catch as catch can. But what are opportunities to serve, pet is kind of interesting because it has all of these mom and pop entrepreneurs, no matter how much there's a roll up of veterinary clinics or of all of these other things, there's going to be tons of mom and pops. How can pet care entrepreneurs think about servicing those people? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So just like how do you like manage towards a B2B type opportunity?
So if they think about, like, if they're thinking about their opportunities, what's an opportunity not just for the consumer, but to help all of these other entities in the space, because there's, just because a vet isn't going to be a billionaire doesn't mean that we can't find a way to support him and help make their job easier and help them make it easier to take care of vets.
I mean, I think the key of any, any successful business is find a broad reaching or scalable problem and find a meaningfully unique solution to it. And so whether they, to your comment around like the vets, like if that goes to, going to your veterinarian, asking them, have like a couple interviews with a couple different vets and identifying where some pain points are. And then, if maybe there's some inklings about like where you think your solution could plug in, just continue to like refine whatever your ultimate proposition would be. But at the end of the day, I just like find a scalable problem or a large scale problem and, plug in a meaningfully unique solution to it. And I like, in terms of extending your business, I feel like that's, the like one fundamental way to do it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that I would think from the perspective of consumers want transparency around pet care. And so, webcams have become really popular at doggy daycare where you can watch your pet during the day and see how he's doing. But creating more transparency for all elements of care and, let's say, supporting that transparency, or enhancing that transparency, or using that transparency as a marketing element. So as an example, I look at my dog at daycare on the webcam. I want to see my dog having fun. I want to see a wonderful scene. I want to see a fun environment, fun toys, and so forth. So I would think backwards from that. How would I help the service provider deliver an experience that's going to feel better to see, and is supportive of that transparent experience, or whether, I'm talking about daycare, it could relate to grooming, it could relate to boarding, it perhaps could relate to veterinary care as well.
What, if you here in the audience, what are the questions that you have? If we could ask, does anybody have a specific one? We've got one right here.
Following up from that question, I was curious what innovations you guys are seeing in the veterinary care space. I feel like that's one of the larger cost areas for pet owners, and would love to hear some positive news about that.
There's several different things going on in that space. I know telehealth is one of the big themes right now, and within the vet space, there's still regulation in the majority of states that requires the veterinarian to actually have hands on the pet before they can provide any kind of like diagnosis or service. And so there's quite a few lobby groups that are trying to change that. And then that may, if that in fact changes, that would open up the number of customers that they would be able to bring in and service, and potentially lower than the costs and make it a little bit more convenient for the pet owner.
That's a great example. Your question about what are we seeing to improve care? So there's a model out there. If you've heard, Petco has this new prototype store called Pet Coach, which is a service-centric store. Most of the square footage is dedicated to services, and so the ability for the consumer to go in and have access to all of the different elements of care that they could want, as well as having the products and so forth handy, as well as sort of an integration with an online experience extension of that store, I think is a pretty cool idea. I don't know exactly how it's going, but it feels to me like something that ought to be perpetuated as part of the care delivery system by Petco and others. So.
So what kind of innovation you see in the insurance space, and why so little pets are insured in the U.S., if you have any kind of ideas?
So the question is, why any innovations in the pet insurance space, and why penetration on pet insurance is so low in the U.S.? Do you have any observations on that? It's a shame we don't have Bill here.
Yeah, there's another person on our team that actually piloted a pet insurance business for Purina. We ultimately decided to exit that business and sell it. Unfortunately, I don't really have like a really good insight into, like, I wasn't on the team at that point in time, so I don't really understand the rationale behind that. So sorry, I couldn't offer a little more insight into that one.
What about from a consumer perspective? You just as a pet parent, do you have pet insurance, and why or why wouldn't you?
No, okay, I got good reframe there. No, so like as a pet owner, I don't have pet insurance. The reason why is like it's never really like I guess probably awareness is probably one of the bigger reasons. Like I just never really like thought about it, never like costed it out. It's funny like within the human space, at least when you're working for an employer, it's kind of like an out of mind kind of situation where you just like check a box on what plan you want. Yeah, it seems like there could be maybe an opportunity for broader awareness and marketing efforts around pet insurance.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. So I think the number, is about 3%, I believe, of pets are covered by insurance. And I have 4 pets, 2 dogs, 2 cats, no pet insurance. And, as a pet owner, today, the economics are not compelling. You're not going to actually save, in my estimation, you're not actually going to save money. You may increase certainty. You're definitely going to pay that premium, but you're not necessarily going to save anything. And I think part of that is, this becomes a bit of an endless loop, but part of it is the insurance companies don't have enough power where they've actually been able to negotiate lower rates with the veterinarians. There's not been a big movement towards generic drugs and so forth. So it would seem like, as a bystander, not an interested and aware party in this conversation, but it would seem like it would take perhaps the large veterinary chains, one of them, a few of them perhaps, to launch their own insurance, because then they can actually offer something to the consumer that otherwise I'm not sure how you get there. So that's my bystander observation of why it hasn't gotten traction.
So in that case, that would be kind of like, launching a better consumer experience that happens to be bundled around insurance. So it could offer access and, all of those kinds of quality metrics more so than necessarily the price savings. What other questions do we have?
So you guys were mentioning about how CBD oil recently reached its crest in terms of like it just became so popular, so well known that actual research and other opinions are actually kind of entering this conversation as well. So similarly, for the humanization of animals, I know there's also a group of the population on the other side where they're also like somewhat chastising this movement as well. Do you see this like crest coming up, and if so, how will the industry respond to that?
So are you saying like the conflicting, you've got the people that are all about, CBD is the greatest thing in the world, and other people that think it's the opposite point of view? Like how does things like that get resolved?
So it was just kind of like, it was just using it to illustrate the crest point, saying that like maybe there's an opposing viewpoint or opposing movement against the humanization, and if so, how is the industry prepared to deal with that?
Yeah, so this reminds me of the joke that we make that if you look at all of the claims, if you go to any of the big pet care trade shows and you look at, well, this is grain-free and this is free range and this is this and this is that, and like if you took all of those claims and lumped them together to say if they were all equally valid, your pet wouldn't be able to eat anything. So, can you talk a little bit about like all these trends, because a lot of them are fads that are not necessarily based on science. Some of them are based on science. Some of them are based on, human reactions, like people feeling like, we see a lot of companies that are doing vegan things because veganism is important on humans, may not be as important to an omnivore or a carnivore. Talk a little bit about how those fads kind of rise and crest and fall.
Yeah, I think CBD is somewhat of a unique situation where it kind of exploded on the scene for both human and pet right around the same time. And so the attention, the growth curve of it like splashing into the market was probably more exaggerated than most. Like within the pet category, grain-free is one that comes to mind, limited ingredients, raw, freeze-dried, dehydrated. All these are trends, but they didn't necessarily sync up with like the same movement or the same explosion in human. And so for CBD, again, like I think it just comes down to now there's a lot more eyes on it. And so with anything as it grows in popularity, there's more scrutiny, more counter opinions. And I think it'll just be people will fall on either side of the debate, and some may not even enter it. And they're like, CBD, there's some pros, some cons, I'm just going to avoid it. So I think you'll have people in the 3 different camps, like for it, just avoid it, and then against it.
So, Andy, with your background, can you recall anything that was, what was before CBD? Like if you can think back to other trends that kind of came and, how they developed and how they dissipate. Do you see them in the pet industry being similar, or are the trends more fast paced, or, just have you seen that? Have you seen how the trends have changed over time?
Think about that one. How to compare that? There have been, certainly, the pet industry historically has trailed many of the human industries. So if I were to look at fashion, we used to be in the pet apparel business. So, ladies' fashion would come out, and then maybe a couple of years later, there would be similar pet fashions. But yeah, I don't know if that could be next. But then the time frame between what was human and what was pet began to shrink, and it started to become same season. So if plaid, buffalo plaid was big in human apparel, it might the same season be big in pet apparel. I think CBD, just like you just said, is a great example of that, where it became very popular in both. I'm trying to think back to some other big trends that sort of feel like this. There have been a lot of trends, many that took root and others that didn't, but I'm not sure I see appreciable. This is a big one. This is definitely CBD. I can't think back to something that has had so much attention so quickly. I remember, just as one little anecdote, I was at a trade show just about a year ago, and at that trade show, there were, I think I was told 25 or 27 maybe booths that had CBD products. And to the previous trade show, I don't know if there were any, maybe one or two, or I don't know. The next trade show, I think I was told, which was like 6-7 months later, something like that. I think I was told like 115, 120 booths that had CBD products in them. So it is remarkable how fast it's growing. I can't think of an analogy to another trend I think that has grown quite as quickly. The barriers to entry are fairly low, so it's very easy to get into the CBD space. It's primarily done in treats or supplements, but people are putting in a whole bunch of other things as well. So I'm not sure if I can speak any differently to how trends are trending differently.
Can I suggest another example and ask a prognostication on your part about meatless or alternative proteins, and how human consumption seems to be on the rise, or at least the interest in it? And will that subsequently trend in the companion animal?
Yeah, we've seen some big IPOs in that space on the human side, and seen some interesting things happening on the pet side. Can you talk about that?
It's definitely, it's a wave that's coming. I don't know, just because of, like, you mentioned the question earlier about some of the regulatory approvals. That may delay or cause a slow trickle of them entering the market. The consumer takeaway on it, I think will still remain to be seen. I'm just thinking things like the Impossible Burger, or Impossible Whopper. You compare the Impossible Whopper to the regular Whopper. I've done the taste test before, and they're pretty close. And at the end of the day, one isn't necessarily healthier than the other. They all have the same fats, and like the trade-offs that you make on the nutrients aren't necessarily different. It's more of the sustainability story behind it. So I think it'll just remain to be seen in terms of like the level of traction. But in terms of them hitting the market and like a sudden wave of them hitting the market, I think the regulatory bodies will probably cause it to be more of a maybe not quite as big of a tidal wave when it ultimately hits.
Yeah, I think. I think that's well said. I would say that two elements. Number one, pet trends continue to follow human trends, and so it's a good bet that will continue. Number two, we get to make decisions for our pets about what they're going to eat, which is easier than making decisions for ourselves, because we have free choice. And so, I think that pet food decisions will be driven a little bit more around the health as opposed to the taste. The taste becomes a little bit secondary to perceived health benefits. So to whatever extent that impacts that, whether that's your belief in the importance of sustainability or other characteristics.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Well, it's funny too because like within the pet space, there's almost a competing trend about like the ancestral diet, right? The higher protein, the higher meat, and so again, like the level of adoption within the pet category will be interesting to see how that plays out.
And a lot of those trends are, we hear from some of the scientists that are doing research in that space that those things are not, like for example, we assume that the best part, for a carnivorous creature, a dog or something, like that it wants sirloin or it wants this thing, and that's actually not what it eats first out in the wild, so there's certainly some, right, yeah, so it's a different thing. But we have another question here.
Yeah, sure. So how do you guys, what do you guys think about the service dogs and the emotional support dogs? It became a huge debate nowadays in the US. I think globally, actually. When do you know that actually that person needs a service dog or an emotional support dog? I'm talking about that because as we work with cities and towns, I see that that's going to be regulated in the city and towns level, not the federal level, because they actually do the process themselves. And I'm just curious because I believe that pet humanization is in the past, and this is now actually the huge problem that we're facing today. How do you know when is a service dog an emotional support dog? And what do you guys think about that? How do you make laws, or how do you regulate that?
That's an interesting space.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, so because it is a political topic, I don't know if I can necessarily speak from a Purina perspective, but from my personal perspective, I would say that, I mean, at the end of the day, if like the dog, if it's not causing an issue for someone else, if it's not a danger to another person, I don't see an issue with somebody having a service dog. As long as it's not, as long as it's not causing discomfort or danger to other people, then I don't really see a problem with it. So again, that's Adam's perspective, not Purina's perspective.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm qualified to respond at all, but yeah, I think that, I mean, because you're really getting into what does the person need, right? And so I don't know how you determine or legislate that. So I'm not sure I can be of any help.
Yeah, could you guys let's take that? I mean, because I don't know that we can answer that, but talk a little bit about what what we are seeing is that like it's very clear that the benefits of of being a pet parent extend, are greater than just having somebody to be able to scratch behind the ears. Like that's adds a huge amount. I know, Purina, you guys do some work with like shelters. Like for people that are domestic violence survivors that that they a lot of why they will come out and actually accept help is because they can bring their pet with them, and the relationship that people have with their pets. Can you talk a little bit about what do you see about kind of like that larger, that kind of that feel good, how people and pets together are better, tell that story.
No, I mean, I definitely like people. Like there's documented cases and clinical studies of people's heart rate and their blood pressure, like everything being healthier when you're alongside a pet. There are like there are dogs that go into schools that help kids who are anxious reading in front of a person. Like it gives them the confidence and the comfort that someone's listening and someone's willing, and they're not going to judge them. And so there's so many benefits to pets beyond just like sitting there and petting. Like you can have a bad day and you come home and you have this little friend there waiting for you who doesn't care like about what your day was like, doesn't care even if you you left them at home all day, and they're not mad at you, right? They're so excited to see you, and there's something to that. Like when my dog comes to work with me every day, and I kind of mentioned that as soon as someone like acknowledges him, you get so excited. I just noticed that throughout the course of the day when people stop by like my door, and Chief comes over, like they just get a big smile on their face, and their whole day from that point on they start laughing. And several people have been like, "Oh, I needed that," and it's just the pets just bring so many benefits to people's lives, like from an emotional standpoint. Like to your point, like about them being better together. I think like dogs definitely make us better. I don't know how much better we make dogs, but like in cats too. But they definitely make our lives better.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think that if you really think about it, if we're actually if people have pets and it makes them happy and it reduces their stress, we're making the country a better place by having more pets, make the world a better place by having more pets, maybe we prevent wars, lets everybody get a few more pets. So I wanted to turn that around though to a little bit of a question. Hopefully I'm not going to get this wrong. I thought I just read something about how, did Purina just come out with some new ingredient announcement around allergies? Because I think Purina is going to improve the world with this one.
Yeah. So we just came out. The product will be hitting the market later this year. That essentially allows people who are allergic to cats to. It blocks the hormone in, I believe it's the hormone in cat saliva that triggers allergies. And so if you were allergic to a cat, and then we've done years and years of clinical studies, there's no damage to the cat. Like the cat is just like their normal cells. They just don't secrete this saliva that causes people to have allergies. And the reason why people think they're allergic to the hair is because cats are licking their hair all the time. And so the saliva gets put on their hair, and that's why people associate the allergy with the hair. But it's actually in the saliva, and we have an ingredient now that blocks that. So people who wanted to be cat owners but couldn't because they were allergic to cats can now be cat owners and not have the negative side effects.
That's awesome. Do we have any other questions here? That's a pretty cool product.
Very cool. So speaking of the e-commerce, you compared Amazon and Troy. So when we go to Amazon, we can tell which product has been sponsored to promote. But Troy, they don't have such things to tell you if it's sponsored or not. But undoubtedly, every time when I'm going to search products, they will have type of certain products always being ranked very high or in the top. So I don't know if it's just real popular or they have been sponsored to promote. Do you think Troy or other pet e-commerce should be recognized to tell you which one has been advertised like Amazon, or it's okay just to keep it that way?
So.
I think I'll repeat back what I think you asked. I think you were saying that with Amazon, if you go there and look for any type of a pet product, you would know which ones were being advertised and perhaps even why certain ones were appearing at the top. And with Chewy, you don't necessarily know that. It could be that they're managing the results for their own benefit. And I do think that's certainly technically accurate. But what I would give you as a counterpoint, and I'm not going to support either one, they're both wonderful companies, but the counterpoint is that Chewy creates a curated assortment of pet products instead of, Amazon. Anyone wants to put any pet product up there, they can. Amazon may not necessarily carry the product, but they will be a platform for others to sell the product. Whereas Chewy is actually making conscious decisions. Their merchandising buying teams are making decisions, hopefully that are in the best, and I think they are, in the best interest of pet owners. So while they could theoretically manipulate the results, perhaps based on margin rates or other things that aren't necessarily in the end consumer's interest, I think there's a benefit to that as well. And so at the end of the day, right, consumers get to pick where they're going to shop. And so if that's a problem for people, that they really want that transparency and that wider assortment, you go to Amazon. If you want a curated assortment, even though you may not necessarily know the motivation and you don't like how it's causing you to see other products that are not in your best interest, then maybe you go somewhere else and there's an option C at some point. That's my take on it.
Ditto. I think you covered it pretty well.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, looks like we're about ready to wrap up here. Thank you very much for the conversation. I just want to close with this. And so people that are either here or watching this on video later, they typically, we see a lot of people in the industry that, it's an emotional thing. They do it because of their pet, or they, it's not, nobody gets into it because oh, I really, I know nothing about pets, but this really looked like the best place for me to be, So it's an emotional buy. But what can you tell a startup, if you were going to give some advice to an entrepreneur that is, somewhere between you should do it and everything is going to be wonderful to, let me tell you the reality, here's all the things that are going to go wrong. What's kind of that middle road of what's the good and the honesty that, that what's the opportunity and what's the reality that you would like all pet care entrepreneurs to know about?
The opportunity and the reality. So the pet category is growing like crazy. people are always looking for new ways to engage and connect with their pets. So like if you're a pet owner, if you know pet owners and they're dealing with real problems, chances are there's a lot of other pet owners, pet parents that are dealing with similar problems, and if you can solve that problem, then there's probably an opportunity for you. Now, it's not going to be easy because there's a lot of other people doing the same thing, but if you're truly passionate about it, you're clever, you're willing to pivot when maybe your path is showing you that there's an opportunity to pivot, or or you're running into a wall, then don't be too proud to make that pivot. And another, like I would say, when you're trying to grow, don't try to light the ocean on fire. Like focus, build some wins in areas that you feel confident you can build wins in, and then use those successes and those data points to then sell the next person. And the same thing with investors. Like if you focus getting those small wins, take those wins then and keep sharing them, and building upon them, and take those wins to the investors, saying like, look, this is what I did in this market by, taking this strategy. I feel that, with your investment, I'll be able to do the same thing in these markets, and then we'll do that in these markets, and we'll continue to grow and evolve.
I think that's extremely well said. I'm not sure I could add a whole lot. That was awesome. Pet industry is a great industry, growing fast. People love their pets, a lot of opportunity. But, you mentioned a lot of times people will get into the industry because they love pets. And just being able to separate your own personal love and feelings around pets from the business opportunities, sometimes I've observed can be a challenge for some folks. So just being conscious of that. But if you can find the problem and keep it focused, there's definitely an opportunity. It's a great business to be in.
Well, thank you both for your time. Thank you, everybody, for your questions, and thank you for everybody for being here. Thanks to our two startups. Just want to close with a plug for the Pet Care Innovation Prize. Go to petcareinnovationprize.com if you want to find out more. Jay, if you'd raise your hand, Jay and I and Adam, know a lot about the prize. We can answer any questions for you about that. But the pet care industry is a great industry. We do have some information on the website, some past things. We'll link you to some economics about the industry if you have some questions about the size of it and where the spend is and things. So look on our website for some of our past content. But overall, it's a great opportunity. We thank you for your time, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks.